Alright, so welcome back for the third part of the video. This is lesson 1.5, part 3. I have one more Pythagorean identity problem to show you, then we'll have one more fact to go with this, and we'll try to put all this together. Okay, here's another one similar. They would like the similar to the previous problem we just did. They'd like the cosecant, and they're going to give you the tangent. So you look at your identities, remember what they were? It was sine squared of theta plus cosine squared of theta equals 1, and that doesn't really help because this is a cosecant, not a cosine. That's a tangent. And then you might want to cheat and look back here. We had a tangent squared plus 1. Equals a secant squared. And you go, ooh, that's helpful. Knowing the tangent, but that would give me the secant. So that's not quite as helpful as I want. And the third identity we had is 1 plus the cotangent squared equal to cosecant squared. And ideally, when we do these problems, we want to use just one trig identity. And it turns out you will only ever have to use one trig identity. So if you find yourself using multiple identities, you're making this harder than you need to. And so I'm going to suggest we start with 1 plus the cotangent squared equals the cosecant squared. And look, that'll let us figure out the cosecant squared. And you might be worried for a minute. It's like, well, yeah, it'll help us figure out the cosecant squared. We don't know the cotangent squared. And if you think back to earlier in this section, it turns out you do know the cotangent squared because you know the tangent. And knowing the tangent, you know the reciprocal of the tangent, which is the cotangent. And so the cotangent is reciprocal. So it's 3 over the square root of 7. And I know I shouldn't leave square roots on the bottom, but we're going to end up squaring this anyway, so we're just going to let this slide for a little bit. All right, so knowing the cotangent, I come over and I go 1 plus the cotangent, I put in 3 over the square root of 7. This whole thing is squared equals the cosecant squared. This isn't so bad. And now I'll square this out. I get 1 plus 3 squared is 9. The square root of 7 squared is 7. So 1 plus 9 sevenths, that's 1 and 9 sevenths. Or if you make that improper, 16 sevenths equals the cosecant squared. I'll take the square root, and it turns out it looks like 4 over the square root of 7. That'd be a plus or minus. I just took a square root. Equals the cosecant. Okay, a couple things here. First of all, it's plus or minus. We are in quadrant 3. A smart trig. I know the tangent is positive, so the cosecant must be negative. And the other thing is don't leave square roots on the bottom. So take the top and bottom of your fraction by square root of 7. And when I do that, I'm going to get 4 square root of 7 all over 7. I'm going to get a negative sign with that. So negative 4 root 7 all over 7 equals the cosecant of theta. All right, lots of things going on here. Let's get to our fifth and final idea. And here it is. 2 last identities. They won't come up a lot in chapter 1, but going forward they'll come up a bunch. And it's tangent. Turns out the tangent, you can get the tangent from taking the sine divided by the cosine. And so then that would make sense since the cotangent is reciprocal. You can get that from dividing the cosine by the sine. And just briefly, why would that be? Well, didn't you learn sine is the y-coordinate over the radius? And cosine is x-coordinate over the radius? And if you look at this as certainly it's a fraction, but it's also considered division. So you have y over r divided by x over r. How do you divide? Multiply by the reciprocal. Look at that, the r's cancel out. And sure enough, you get y over x, which is the tangent. So just 2 more facts to keep straight here. Tangent is sine over cosine. Cotangent is cosine over sine. And the y part we just answered right here. Okay, so that is it for our facts. So it turns out there's, fairly simple definitions in section 4 and all sorts of kind of relations that we can find. Okay, I'd like to do this problem here, and then that last page I'm going to skip, and if you get to problems like this, I will show you in class how to do these, or I'll also show you there's a shorter way to do this. So I want to show you one way to do this now. in your notes, and then if you ask in class, say, wait, did you mention there's a shortcut? And I can show you the shortcut in class. All right, so let's try this. Find all of the trig function values. There's 6 trig functions for the given angles. We got our work cut out here. We're going to do number 1, and number 2 we'll talk through. But like I say, the other 2 we're just going to leave alone. Okay, they gave me the tangent of alpha is 3/4. Well, immediately I'll find the cotangent of alpha. It's the reciprocal, 4/3. Not too bad. 1 done. Still 4 more trig functions to go. So maybe I look at my Pythagorean identities, and I remind yourself what those are again. Back here, your Pythagorean identities. Since they gave me the tangent, I think I'll use one with the tangent in there. Oops. There. 1 more page. All right. I use one with the tangent in there, and it was tangent squared plus 1 or 1 plus tangent squared. It doesn't really matter, but just so I'm consistent here. All right. Tangent squared plus 1 equals a, I'm just going to circle this so we've got one thing done. All right, tangent squared plus 1 equals a secant squared. Tangent is 3/4. So go 3/4 squared plus 1. 3/4 squared is 9/16 plus 1. That's 1 and 9/16. Make it improper. I get 25/16 is the secant squared. Take the square root, and it looks like 5/4 is the secant. And again, I'm in quadrant 1A, smart trig class. Quadrant 1A, everything is positive. So the secant is 5/4. 2 things done. But wait a minute, I just found the secant. Don't I know the reciprocal of the secant? The cosine? Cosine is 4/5, guys. We're getting there. 3. 2 more to go, because we have our 4th right here. They gave us the tangent to begin with. And maybe I'll use one more Pythagorean identity. I'll go 1 plus the cotangent squared equals the cosecant squared. And I look back and I realize, sure enough, I have the cotangent. It's right here, 4/3. So 1 plus 4/3 squared. I'll just write that, 4/3 squared. So 1 plus 16/9. I add that up, and it looks like 1 and 16/9. And if I make that improper, I get 25/9 equals a cosecant squared. I know how to get rid of a square root. I'm sorry, get rid of a square. I'll take the square root, and I'm going to get a 5/3 is the cosecant. And again, it's plus or minus, but I'm in the first quadrant, so it's plus. So I've got my 4th, and my 5th fact is the sine of alpha equals the reciprocal of the cosecant. So the sine of alpha equals 3/5. Bit of a mess there, but hopefully that makes sense. And it's good practice with some of the facts that we just learned. Okay, if I were to do the second problem, I'm not going to, but I would realize it's the same problem. I'd work through everything the same, except in quadrant 3, A smart trig, I would have the tangent and the cotangent. Out of all my answers here, the tangent and the cotangent would be positive, and the other 4 answers, the cosine, the secant, the sine, the cosecant, those 4 would have ended up negative, in this case when I'm in the 3rd quadrant. Okay, that takes care of a pretty heavy lesson here between these 3 videos. And like I said, these number 3 and number 4, I can show you another way to do these problems in addition to what I just did. And so coming out of this section, what do you have to have memorized? What should you know off the top of your head? And here's what you need to know off the top of your head. You need to know the reciprocal identities. Sine, cosecant are reciprocals. Cosine, secant are reciprocals. Tangent, cotangent are reciprocals. You want those off the top of your head. Second thing you want, a smart trig class. So you need to know the plus or minus signs of the trig functions in the various quadrants. The ranges. You need to know, is it possible for the sine to be 5, cosecant to be 5, tangent to be 5, things like that. So what are the ranges of the trig functions? And then the quotient identities you should know. So tangent is sine over cosine, cotangent is cosine over sine. And so if you're thinking, wait, what about the Pythagorean identities? I'll expect that you know how to use those, But at this point, I won't have you memorize those. Those will come just a little bit later where you're required to memorize those. All right, guys, that will complete Chapter 1. One chapter done. 7 more to go.